following any of our of this discussion, a little bit loose on current use. We do have three bills. We've been talking and invited you in specifically to have take any input that you might have on the bill H-134 that has a component that deals with affordable housing. I will say that the bill as it's introduced, and we haven't marked it up at all. We've had conversations, but we don't have a physical revision drafted anywhere. But we have acknowledged, I think we've heard testimony and we've acknowledged amongst ourselves that as written, the 3-mile radius is excessive, and that essentially covers the entire state. So that's not very targeted anyway. And that something either smaller or something that aligns perhaps with the changes made last year in H-687, which were for revisions to Act 250 that set up these new tiers, that there might be some overlap there with an approach you might want to take. So in any case, we've heard testimony from the Ag Agency, from Forest Park and Recreation, and from the tax department. And I know that the administration is still trying to get a handle on what we're doing and what position it might want to take. So having said that, welcome any thoughts that you might have and answer any questions too that we can for you.
That's great. I appreciate that. Thank you for that intro. And you certainly addressed a couple of the items that I mentioned in the written supplement to my testimony that I provided. And so what I'd say is I love the idea of some off-ramp to current use that would incentivize development into housing. I acknowledge the choice to tie it to affordable housing. I would say I don't think it necessarily needs to be tied to affordable housing, though I welcome that. I think that's fine. But perhaps tying it to more broadly to residential development. And what I'd say there is just, we talk a lot about the housing spectrum, and that all units, largely all units, support an improvement to our housing ecosystem here in the state. That's not to talk you out of going the route of tying it to affordable housing and definition. That's just to open the conversation to it could be broader to residential development. If folks want, I'd be happy to share a couple of maps. If I have the ability to share my screen.
Well, we can give you that ability. If you don't have it, our committee assistant just stepped out, so it'll take a minute, but I'll use the minute to ask Representative Nelson had a hand up.
Thank you, Chairman. Commissioner, it says affordable housing. I helped come up with the idea for this bill, and it's supposed to be affordable workforce housing, or you put it more elegantly, residential housing. That was the idea behind this bill. It's not so much, it's more for housing for, geez, I look at you to see you, but I gotta look at this way so you can see me. It's so that we have a place for a workforce to live. And so I feel it would need an amendment, and to be, and as you put it, residential housing, which encompasses all of it. It is not designed for someone to buy a block of land and build a McMansion on it.
Yeah.
They want to do that, pony up.
I think that's a great point, Representative, and one of the best ways to get to that is tie it to an existing definition. That way you're not creating something new. And so what you've done here with tying to a definition of affordable housing is I think a good route to go. There are other definitions that could be considered. For example, if you look at the priority housing project definitions, there's something to consider in there where you tie to particular area median incomes. So, for example, I believe in priority housing projects, the affordable component of priority housing projects include up to 80% of the area median income for rental homes being built, and up to 120% of the area median income for ownership, homes for ownership. So those are just things to consider. So you can do that. You can tie to area median income. You can go the route like you've done of tying to the affordable housing definition that's already in statute, so that you're not recreating the wheel.
While we're waiting, could you just see if I- or maybe just text me? Commissioner, we probably have a minute to introduce ourselves and should have done that earlier. So since you haven't been in our committee, maybe ever, not this year anyway, I think so. Representative Nelson, do you want to introduce yourself?
Yeah, Representative Richard Nelson, Orleans 1, Town of Derby.
The Commissioner Representative Jed Lipsky, Lamoille 1, Stowe.
I'm Leland Morgan. I represent Grand Isle County and West Milton. And I recall back in 2018, we worked together when you ran for an office and I did also.
That's right.
And I'm David Durfee. I live in Shaftesbury and represent Sunderland and Glastonbury as well.
I'm Heather Supna. I represent Windsor 4, which is the towns of Barnard, Pomfret, Bridgewater, and West Hartford.
Hi, John O'Brien, Windsor Orange 1, that's Royalton in my hometown of Tunbridge.
Greg Burt, Cabot, Danville, and Peacham.
Michelle Boslin, Wyndham 3, Westminster, Rockingham, and Brookline.
I want to call on Representative Lipsky in a moment. And after he's had a chance to ask his question, I wanted to maybe ask you, Commissioner, if you could talk a little bit about that definition that's in the draft language anyway. Representative Lipsky.
Yeah, thank you. I live in a town of Stowe and we have abundant developed. Let's say the average new house is 1.5 to 1.7. Some are condominiums, some are townhouses, some are clustered apartments up at the mountain. What this amendment or bill is to address really has to do with entry-level housing. So young Vermonters can eventually not just be housed, but to develop some equity through ownership. So call it entry-level housing, workforce housing. Workforce could be a school principal or even a superintendent or a physician's assistant in one of the rural hospitals. Where rural Vermont, Stowe is rural, but not affordable for anyone, is what the intent of this. We're vast rural communities here that are really desperate to have entry level for young families start. And I'm apologizing. I have to leave to be in another committee, but I just want to make that point. It's not just affordable where someone could rent at a subsidized rate. Right. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Thank you, Representative. And I think that's a great point. And it's really what I think you hear a lot of us in the administration and a lot of you all in the State House all really angling for, acknowledging that we need to try to make it possible to develop that type of housing. We know the numbers don't make it easy right now. And so, making adjustments to our land use, and this is a great way to go about it, help to make these things pencil, because that's part of why you don't see a lot of it right now.
Thank you.
Could you just say a word or two, Commissioner, about the 24 VSA 4303? That definition?
My memory is getting foggy on me because it's been a few days since I looked at that definition. What I can say is I think it does actually follow pretty closely with the definition that I just cited that is used for the priority housing project, that 80 AMI for rental, 120 AMI for home ownership. I'm saying that with a caveat, and I'll follow up with the committee after I go back and check, but I'm pretty sure that's it.
Okay, good, thank you. And we can have our legislative council, brief us on that too.
Great.
And maybe they did already when they came in and walked through the bill first time, but good for the reminder. All right, so we're going to give you sharing permission, and then if you have something that you want to put up.
Sure. So I'm not gonna share anything that you all aren't aware of. clearly you're already touching on these topics. I just wanted to give you a sense of if designated areas is what you choose to tie this to, great. I thought it'd just be good for you all to see a broad map. Obviously, this isn't a perfect cut, but northern Vermont on the left, southern Vermont on the right, and just those yellow dots that you see there are designated village centers. And if you can see a couple of these little red dots, one in St. Albans, one in Newport, got one in Waterbury, Montpelier, Berry City, Burlington, Winooski. Those are our designated downtowns: Rutland, Brandon, Poultney, Springfield. So, and you all already touched on, look, 3 miles is going to be excessive, and you could imagine if you start going 3 miles from all those little dots, yeah, it's all just going to bleed together, and that's evident here too in my next slide. What you're looking at here is something that I think you can start to ponder. So like I said, the orange is these are our village centers. And then there's a couple others in here. So on the left, you can see they're covered up by some blue, but you can see the downtowns of downtown Burlington, downtown Winooski. But the dark red is covered up by blue. The blue is neighborhood development areas. And then the red that you see that there's sort of solid red, and then outside of that, there's a red line sort of encircling the actual downtown itself. That red line, as with the orange line that you see around the village centers, that represents the planning buffer. These are the areas that were used in developing the interim Act 250 exemptions, which are in place now while the future land use mapping, so the tiered structure, while the tiered structure is being put in place, we are following interim exemptions. And I mentioned a couple folks, if you want to dive in more, who could work with you on more maps. I think John Adams is a great resource for mapping, as well as some of the regional planning commissions. But these interim exemptions largely follow those the areas that you see captured, not just the solid area of the orange and the purple and red, but also the lines around them. So in village centers, that line represents a 1/4 mile buffer around the village center. For downtowns, that line represents a 1/2 mile. The purple that you see, there's one up in Colchester and the top left there. That is a new town center. So South Burlington and Colchester have new town centers. You'll see a new town center in communities that don't have a traditional downtown or perhaps a center. So I live here in South Burlington. I'm actually just on the edge of that little purple right now. And as you know, we've never really traditionally had a center of town or a downtown. That is now being built on Market Street. South Burlington probably is the best example in the state of a new town center truly becoming, in just a matter of a few years, a downtown for a community. That's the intent of a new town center. And so these all give you a sense of the intent of our land use and how we've used the designated areas for our land use. I bring all this to your attention just to say that, and a similar map here in central Vermont, just to say these have been used as the proxy over the last few years for guiding land use and development. Now, they really weren't designed for that. They were designed originally to guide incentives and investment and to help the state sort of cater certain policies, mostly investment, into a set of parcels that are all clustered together. Now, so that could be a starting point for something like this. Look at what's known as the Act 181 interim exemption areas, to the bill that you cited, H 687. I think that's a reasonable starting point for something like this. You'll also need to think about that future land use mapping that's being undertaken right now to identify these Tier 1A and Tier 1B areas. Again, I think that's a reasonable starting point for something like this. I'll note that I think members of the administration and others are watching carefully because we're concerned about those Tier 1A and Tier 1B areas perhaps being too narrowly constructed. That may not be the case, but we're watching closely. And I think a lot of our RPC for Regional Planning Commission friends are on the same page with us that future land use maps are aspirational. And so ideally, let's take Barry City for an example there. That downtown, that's a pretty narrow area. I would hope that that's not the entire Tier 1A area for Barry City. And I would think that from what I understand, the folks doing the mapping, the municipalities with the RPCs tend to agree with that, that even beyond that buffer, we should be designing our systems, designing these maps such that we can have thoughtful and responsible growth beyond those areas. I put that all to you just for context, not to say that you need to weigh in on that process, but just so that's all in your mind as you think about what areas you may want to create this this sort of off ramp out of current use for housing development.
We had a question, and maybe might ask you to put the map back up. I don't know.
Well, I mean, my question actually is about what the green means. I noticed on the first map you had the most significant occurrence of that was Taft's Corners, which I actually drove through last week, and it didn't look like Vermont to me. It looked like Sprawlin, Indiana or something. No offense to the good people of Williston, but now I see Montpelier with that. I'm like, what is that green? Because it's very different than most of what I know as Vermont development. And yeah, what is the green?
Sure. So the green is what's it's a designated growth center. And these again, these are all going to transition. So growth centers and neighborhood development areas, the blue, will transition in this new structure, the future land use mapping, into what's known as sort of planned growth areas. So these are areas that we want to grow. Now, you'll note Williston looks the way it looks, but Montpelier doesn't look the way it looks. Doesn't look the way Williston looks, nor does Colchester in its growth center, and that's because all of these are designed to enable a municipality to take the lead. And so there's nothing that forces a community to build a certain housing type or a certain height as a result of these designations, or even in the future land use mapping. It puts the municipality in the driver's seat and says, we can now bring resources to bear, and you can have a faster track through certain state permitting. So the municipality is really put in the driver's seat.
How far again are those various colored lines, the circles? How far are they mapped from the designated area or the growth centers?
Yep. So in this case, so Montpelier, again, you can see the red line. So that's a half mile. So the downtown is a half a mile from that red circle that goes around it. And then all others, so the downtowns are half mile. All others, the buffer line around them is a quarter mile. So you can do some quick, just sort of eyeballing, and all the village centers that you see, even up in the corners, they would all bleed together at a 3 mile. Not that you all are, I recognize you all have already moved on in the discussion from 3 mile, but just to sort of make the point that, you know, a 3 mile would just have all of these run together.
Sure. Yeah.
And so, you know, a half mile is somewhat tactical.
And these represent the temporary under Act 121
That's
combinations.
Right.
Yeah.
These do, and the maps I'm showing you are capturing all village centers. I should clarify there were additional requirements put in place in Act 181 for the interim exemption areas, such that not all village centers actually get to participate in the interim Act 250 exemptions. The reasons they wouldn't get to participate are if the municipality in which the village center lies, if the municipality does not have, it needs both zoning and subdivision bylaws. It also needs any of the following: municipal water, municipal wastewater, or suitable soils, so that you could, you know, a perk system or some other means of implementing a wastewater system. So you need one of those three things, as well as municipal zoning and subdivision bylaws. So when you think about the Northeast Kingdom, where there are a lot of village centers, many of these village centers that you're looking at up in the NEK do not get to participate in the interim exemptions. So that's something for you all to contemplate. If you tie to the interim exemptions as enacted in Act 181, you could be leaving out a number of village centers.
And again, that's because they don't have they don't have either water or wastewater or soils.
I'd say in the NEK, it's primarily because they either don't have zoning or they don't have zoning and subdivision bylaws. That's the primary driver in the Northeast Kingdom.
Okay. Representative Nelson had a question.
Yeah, do you have the circles on for up in the Newport, Derby, Coventry area or not?
I didn't grab those screenshots. I was tempted to do a live map demo, but the last time I tried that, it froze up on me. So map
That's
doesn't
fine.
like live demo.
Okay, and another I've learned since we started this process, that 1A, 1B, I learned that the removal of land, the prime ag soil cost is actually more prohibited than the current use cost.
Yeah.
And so, you know, up there you have Derby, you have a growth center up there in Derby. And I just use that for example, because I know it and I know they have sewer and water. And actually that's probably Derby line where you have it highlighted.
Yeah.
Which,
yeah.
yeah, Derby line's full. The village boundaries are already stacked up, but how should that be part of it to encourage that residential housing we need to handle that fine on taking prime ag land out in a restricted area? That's part of that growth center type deal?
I would highly encourage you all to consider this. I'm not an expert in that, but I do know, talking to developers, talking to folks on the ground that do the funding, that's a huge hindrance, particularly when you're dealing with prime ag soils in areas that clearly cannot serve any agricultural purpose anymore. Nor would I think any of us intend for that. I think Gus Seelig from the Vermont Housing and Conservation Board is one person that could speak to that. I think anyone from the regional planning commissions, potentially Catherine Dimitrick, would be a really good resource there, as would a number of developers that I'd be happy to supply a list of that have pointed to examples where I think the high cost of dealing with prime ag soils with certain housing developments does not align with what I think our intent is of the policy as a state.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I don't see any other hands from the committee. So I don't know if there's more that you wanted to add.
I think that's everything, Mr. Chair. I really appreciate, I just want to note that 5 years ago, I'm not sure that you had every committee in the State House discussing housing that you do now. And I really appreciate this committee's leadership in jumping into this discussion and really trying to understand ways that you can support housing development in a responsible way. It's really fantastic, and it really supports I think this statewide push towards finding ways to responsibly develop housing without to the representative's comment earlier, without making folks feel like this isn't Vermont anymore. So I really want to thank you all for what you're doing.
Well, thank you for coming in. We do have another question, Representative O'Brien.
I just wondered how these growth centers align with what we're seeing with these extreme weather events, with flooding, with FEMA buyouts, all that. How does that, and that's sort of even beyond Act 250 stuff. So policy wise, how do we make that work?
Yes, an incredibly important point, and one that we grapple with every day, and which will be accounted for in the future land use mapping. Our historic settlement patterns largely follow floodplains because we followed our rivers. Many of our downtowns, Bennington, Barry, Montpelier, Brattleboro, you've got floodplains that run right through the heart of them, and oftentimes development in those areas is becoming expensive because we're raising the standard for what you need to do for flood proofing. You'll see a lot of our investments and a lot of our initiatives are geared towards enabling that development that's just uphill, just outside of the downtown. All the more reason not to constrain too tightly. So there is this balance. While the 3 mile concept, I don't think anyone's latching onto, and that's fine. Um, Having this buffer, there is a reason our interim exemptions have this buffer outside of the downtowns. It's to support something like, you're all sitting in Montpelier right now. So if you look down the road, there's a proposed development by the city of Montpelier up on the Elks Club Road. And that is, in a lot of ways, a flood-proof way for Montpelier to develop. They could put, 300-400 units of housing, drastically expand the housing stock of Montpelier, and have 300-400 new households that are safe during a flood and give us space to go create a new road out of there. So, Representative, I mean, you hit a nail right on the head with a lot of our current conversations. We need to take that into account in all of our land use in our this future land use mapping.
Thank you.
Are there any other questions? Well, we have the Commissioner Housing.
This was great information. It was positive, as is most of it is not.
We have invited the RPCs in, and I think we've got somebody coming in at the end of the week, as well as John Adams from the mapping division. Forgetting the name of that, but
Yeah, VCGI. Yeah,
VCGI,
John's
yeah.
a great resource.
and maybe he can do a live demo. Maybe he'd feel confident doing a live demo.
He's your guy. Yeah.
of that, yeah. Oh, you go. Representative Burrs, yeah.
Oh, thank you, Chairman. Well, it seems to me like that the simpler the better in terms of H 134. I mean, we want to develop affordable housing, and it sounds like any kind of housing, right? Because if you can create housing for, this middle to upper class, then you free up housing potentially that's of a more affordable nature, right? So, I mean, the bill is designed to make it cost less in order to, to get started. So you're not paying so much in taxes to start development on land. It's first of all talking about being prorated on the basis of acreage versus how it's currently done, which is appraised as a separate parcel, right? So I think that's good on the bill. But the parts that seem to, obviously the 3 mile radius seems, I'd say either, are there ways to find, where we don't have any radius at all and where we're not concerned actually that much with where, I mean, I know some people would be concerned about where the development would happen, but if it's just one home on a 2-acre plot, that's also helpful for the state of Vermont. If that's, if it's on the mountain in Bolton or, on the hillside of Cabot, that's one more house going in. So it seems like to me, shouldn't really matter. Obviously, we don't need to build a 300, apartment unit in Cabot. But we still want to have houses being built on 2 acres, to sort of help out in those situations in the rural areas too. So I'm wondering how this bill could also help in rural situations and not just in the downtown.
It's an important point that regardless of what is done to create an incentive here to sort of reduce a barrier to building housing if folks want to change the use of their land, any development will still have to conform with that municipality's zoning. So the municipality, if it's on a parcel where the municipality does not allow a certain density, it still needs to build to that sort of restricted density. So if the municipality only allows you to build, 1 unit per acre in where the parcel is, you're right, Representative. They'd still have to conform with that, regardless of what's set out in this bill or any of the other. It would still have to conform with what's being set out in future land use mapping, and so it would still run through the same regulatory and permitting processes. So I think it's an important point. This is not a substitute for land use. It's an aspect of it. So, to your point, simpler is better. Would I what I'd say is tying to the initiatives that are already underway, like the future land use mapping, is going to be helpful. And again, this is where the regional planning commissions could really point you in a more specific direction than I can. But perhaps tier 1A and 1B areas, you enable a certain level of this exemption, and perhaps in tier 2 areas, it's maybe a scaled back incentive of some form. And you can choose to start dictating density. To your point, I'd shy away from that, because then that's adding complexity that, frankly, all the other land use regulations will better manage than to try to do it with this incentive. So, but yes, I'd align with efforts that are already in place or underway.
Right. Okay, good. I think we can wrap it up there unless anybody's got a final comment, question. Thank you for joining us.
Yes,
And
thank you.
yeah, we'll be in touch and keep everyone informed about directions that we're heading. And I'll just point out, and this doesn't need to be said, but if the committee wants to pass a bill out this year that would move ahead through the process, we have by Friday to do that. So we are ambitiously scheduling a lot of testimony to see what we might be able to do, keep our options open. Representative Nelson.
When I look at 134 and the other two land use bills that we have, I can envision them being blended together. But on 134 in particular, that Tri-Mag land fine, penalty, fee, whatever you want to call it, will need addressing. And I don't know, and believe me, I want them both, but I almost think this is something we're gonna have to work on, and it may not be ready till next year, right? I don't know if I'm thinking about this the right way. Chairman Durfee, you and your seasoned veterans over here have a lot more experience of this than I do.
It's a good point. Not that we have a lot, well, not that we're seasoned veterans, that's arguable. If we include any language that is, as I think this might be, under the jurisdiction of other committees, then the bill could be moved into another committee, and that would probably mean not crossing the threshold by Friday. However, we can talk about that, and we've got Ledge Council coming in tomorrow to do some marking up on the bills. So we can have that conversation later today. We can talk about that some more too.
And perhaps it's this part this year, the next part next year type of deal. I don't know what Commissioner Farrell thinks of that approach, or.
Yeah, I think that's wise.
All right, good. Thank you. Nice
Thank
to have
you
you
all.
here. Yeah.
Thank you, Mr. Chair and committee members. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
What specifically is technically, it has to pass out of this committee, it has to pass the House floor, it has to be through all the other committees by Friday?
Yeah, the crossover date it can be a little confusing, and my understanding is that if there's a bill that has any appropriation in it or has a revenue impact that would need to go to one of those other committees, then if we just need to do our part by Friday, and then they have another week to do their work. So it's I think it's normal that next week, the week after crossover, is a very busy one in those other committees, because there's a rush of legislation that committees pass by Friday. It ends up being referred, and then we heard this morning, I think, on the House floor, 2 bills were referred to money committees. So they didn't, that takes a day for that to happen. So they have a real busy last 3 days, probably, of next week. anything that affects current use would, or the tax even, would affect the revenue of the state. So it would go to Ways and Means. If we pass anything that we're looking at, any of these, I think would all end up going to Ways and Means for their review. So we'd want to try and make a pretty solid case that it was. Yep. Felt it was a good idea.
So we have until Friday. If something goes to Ways and Means, they can decide, no, we don't want to mess with it this time. We don't have time. And it can just stay there too.
Yeah, and that certainly happens. I mean, just as a simple matter of they've only got so many hours a day and they only have a week, they only have that week.
Yeah.
But also from a policy perspective, they might say, we don't feel that there's enough here. And I just like to say generally, the house is the first step in a three-step process. So even if we do get through Ways and Means, that then it goes over to the other body. Yeah.
What about other committees though, like you were just mentioning? Where
Yes, right. So that's also
shared jurisdiction
yeah, and I think that
more than a drive-by.
and this is where I'm not entirely clear, but if another committee does have possession of the bill, I think that has to, I don't think they can do that next week. I think you pass it, it goes to Ways and Means. I don't think they can send it back. But they can do it informally too, by having a fly over or whatever. Yeah, that happens. So, yeah.
It seems to me with regard to the legal side, all of these towns have zoning regulations that are already built in, like
Not all of them.
not all of them. That's correct. A lot of them, but I was just wondering, how, to me, it's how much do we need to put into the bill with regard to that's trying to affect how things are developed, if that's the case. The meeting was helpful for that, for sure. It seems like we don't need to add a second layer to a layer that already exists in my mind, but.
Yeah. And I think that getting back to, we're the first step in a several step process to any legislation, always getting a sense of whether the administration is, in favor of something can be a useful thing. And so this affects the housing side of things, and it affects the ag side of things and the forestry side of things. So there's different voices there. And when Ryan Patch is here in a few minutes, we can hear at least what he has to say. I don't know whether he'll feel comfortable speaking on behalf of the agency, but we can at least hear what, we understand their thoughts to be on prime ag soils here in this, your point that you're raising, Richard, but also just about making it easier to take land out of agricultural use. Because there is a trade-off here, obviously. There's always that inherent trade-off.
We only make that dirt once. And it's it is a fine line to walk, but there's a block. Anyway, we all know where there's a block of land that someone would like to put housing on, and when you start tagging them with a 500% tax on what the prime ag value is. You start talking $25,000 on an acre. That makes that affordable house that much less, for somebody that's, working class people like we are.
The other thing I'll say, and then we can take a break until 2, is that we do have the miscellaneous agricultural bill that is the one that deals with beneficial substances. Yeah. And we at the moment don't have anything else in that bill. It's a miscellaneous bill. So if there are other things that the committee is interested in trying to get through this year, the things that we've talked about perhaps would be better.
Yeah, that's the one.
That's the one you're going to report. Yeah. So bearing in mind that Representative Nelson has agreed to report it. So.
Pile it on.
And then we shouldn't forget, we also have it's not a bill, but John McCann's one-off on current use too, but
Yeah.
that might just be a.
I've actually asked the Legislative Council who worked on that bill to draft some language who worked on 134 to draft some language that would address that issue of a parcel that's been subdivided, but is still in use. Yeah, so that, and we'll have to talk about whether we feel that that's appropriate or not, but we will have some language to look at. Yeah.
So is the miscellaneous one going to be voted out this week then?
Yes.
Okay, I guess I'm wondering maybe if we might want to think about tacking on the Molly Beatty Distinguished Service Award, just put it in there, because when we heard testimony about there, it
Yeah.
sounds like a good idea. It was honoring this environmentalist that was one of the first women that worked in agriculture and our environmental issues in Vermont. And I mean, we could do it separately, but it's a miscellaneous ag bill, like, I don't know, it might make it easier to just stick it in there. I don't think either one of those is controversial.
We have some testimony tomorrow on that, I think tomorrow.
Okay,
No, I'm sorry, Thursday, yeah.
it could be separate too, it doesn't matter, but that feels like one that could move this.
Yes, right, yeah, no, I agree, we can, in terms of thinking about what has to happen or what
Mhm.
really should happen by Friday, I think both miscellaneous ag bill and that bill. I also have in that list the food bank,
The Vermont Feeding.
Yeah.
Yeah.
and then perhaps something with current use and the other.
That Molly Beatty bill is so strong. I'd run it on its own. That way, if environment or natural resources on the Senate side wanted to look at it, they could and put their stamp on it, because that could go, it's in our committee because we cover forestry.
Mhm.
Over on the Senate side, that would be natural resources.
Mhm.
So let them deal with that clean. And this bill that we have for beneficial subsidence would go to Russell in the Senate Ag, and I've already updated him on it, whatever. And gladly he enjoys his time talking with you on these things.
Yeah, I think that I hadn't thought about that. That's a good point, that it would be, if we combine that into one bill, there'd be two committees dealing with that one bill, and
Yeah.
it might be cleaner just to keep it, yeah. But yeah, I think my hope is that we can move that through. I will flag also H401, which is a bill that we had, just an introduction from the bill sponsor last week. And it's been pretty straightforward. We haven't heard Legislative Council, we haven't even gotten to that point, and they couldn't make it until tomorrow. So we do have some testimony scheduled for tomorrow on that. I know many of you are familiar with it because your names are on the bill. But that's another one that we might try and act on by the end of the week.
Yeah.
Okay, so anyway, think we can be thinking about, and then when we wrap up today, before we wrap up and go home, we'll circle back to if there's anything that people are thinking, we could put this into a miscellaneous bill. You need to try and line up some testimony fairly quickly to do that. Okay, we'll take a break and